Hey, welcome back from spring break. I hope you all had a great and relaxing break. And if you feel so inclined, let me know in the comments on Google Classroom what you did or where you went. My break was pretty low key. I went to West Virginia, did a little bit of online racing via NASCAR Heat. Don't want to brag or anything, but I won a couple races and also crashed a lot. Yeah, I actually made a lot of people angry on that game. Also did a little bit of woodworking, and then I played some music for Good Friday service at church. Now, as much as I love playing music in church, I'm really excited to get back out and do street performing this summer. Yeah, me and my buddies literally set up on the sidewalk with a suitcase that says tips please, and we play music for hours and hope that people walking by toss in a couple bucks. But we've had our fair share of getting kicked out of places. I don't think it's because we suck. I just think some people have something against the banjo.
You're in the shade, I'm in the sun. Why don't you get away, lazy John?
See, it's a beautiful instrument. I don't know why people get annoyed with it. But in the many years I've done it, I've learned that before you go to a new city, you have to see if they require a license to street perform. Some do, some don't. In the cities that do require you to have a license in order to street perform, if you start performing and you don't have proof of a license, you get kicked out. But whenever someone requires you to have a license in order to do a particular job, that's called occupational licensing. And that's what we're going to learn about today. So if you can think back to what we were talking about before spring break, we discussed lobbying and how special interest groups and political action committees, aka PACs, influence the policy-making process. Now we're shifting gears and we're going to start focusing on some economics for the next few weeks, but this particular week's topic is a perfect segue from interest groups and lobbyists to talking about the state government and economics. Now, the whole concept of occupational licensing is actually particularly relevant to you all being students at CTech, because for many of you, you've chosen career fields that require you to get certifications or require you to get some sort of licensing or require you to show that you have some sort of credentials or training that proves that you are well trained and well suited for a particular career. Part of the whole point of vocational school and career tech schools is to give you a leg up on some of that stuff by the time you leave high school. Now, have you ever stopped and thought about who's in charge of determining all of those licensure requirements and stuff that many of you are forced to have? Well, in many cases, not all cases, it's actually determined by the state government. And the state government will have almost cabinet-like positions or boards that determine what steps you need to take to get a license to practice in a certain field. The executive branch at the state level is where you find a lot of these boards. You have the cosmetology board, different medical boards, you have the dental board. You also have boards that determine regulations on fire and building codes and electrical codes. And yes, there's even an education board that's dictating what you learn in school right now and is determining if I'm qualified to teach. All of those boards in the state's executive branch are usually made up of people with past career experience in those particular fields. And they use that experience to try to guide them in setting up what they believe to be the correct qualifications for someone to have before they enter the job market. Oftentimes, these boards will create things like licensure exams that you have to take in order to practice in a particular field to prove that you have the knowledge and know what it takes to follow all the regulations and to provide quality service. So for example, those of you in the medical, dental, and cosmetology fields, you all have to take a board exam from the state government in order to begin practicing in your field and get your license. Those of you in auto, construction, electrical trades, and technology get certifications. Those of you in fire and criminal justice, and those of you that want to be teachers and will have to get your teaching license someday, those are also fields where there are things you have to do before you can actually work in that field. Yeah, speaking of licenses and teaching, in order for me to become a teacher, I had to go to a 4-year university. I had to graduate with a bachelor's degree in education, and I had to study a ton of social studies related content. I had to take 2 licensure exams, one that was on content, basically, do I know everything under the sun possible social studies related? And secondly, a teacher exam, well, do you know the basic concepts about teaching? And then after that, I had to do student teaching under a mentor teacher. And then even after I finally graduated and I had done all that, I had to apply for my license. And I have to update my license every so often, and it costs like $260 to do. Yeah, last year when I had to do that, I got really angry and foolishly took to Instagram to complain and let the world know my thoughts.
I had to pay $250 to renew my teaching license because if I didn't do that, if I was suddenly unlicensed, my kids would stop learning. They would become dumb and they'd stop achieving. It's really crazy how that works.
True.
But thank God we have the state to save the kids. You know, what would we do without the state? Boy, I tell you what, every penny of that $250 was worth it.
Okay, so yeah, I got a little passionate about it. But it led me to ask the question, why can't someone just do a job if they're good at it? Why do they have to get a license and continually renew that license? I mean, if someone's continually bad at a job, either they're going to get fired by their employer or no one is going to want to hire them. So isn't licensing kind of like a scam? Well, some people argue that getting a license to do a particular job is no different than getting a license to drive a car. I mean, you wouldn't want unlicensed drivers with no training driving around everywhere. I mean, can you imagine a world without regulations and rules and licenses? Can you imagine a world where literally anyone can drive a car, including those under 16? Oh no, you can't imagine a world where 7-year-olds can drive a vehicle? Here, let me help you.
He started the vehicle and put it into gear.
I yanked the thing.
And off they went. Two 7-year-olds alone on the road. Latarian drove several miles through Lake Park and Palm Beach Gardens.
We got the one call that I told you about of a driver in the vehicle who looked too short to be able to see over the steering wheel.
Along the way, he ran over 2 mailboxes, hit 2 parked cars in a Costco parking lot, and struck 2 moving cars near Walmart.
I want to do it because it's fun. It's fun to do bad things, to drive into a car.
But did you know that you could perhaps kill somebody?
Yes.
Exhibit A. You also wouldn't want a doctor that had no medical education or experience operating on you. You also wouldn't want to hire a shady contractor to do something with your house. And I certainly wouldn't want to hire someone that didn't actually know anything about cars to work on my brakes. But some people point out that there can be a major downside to occupational licensing. A downside that requires you, the consumer, to pay more for goods and services because it keeps out people from joining an industry. And if you block out people from joining an industry, you lessen competition and choice. And that can prevent you from getting the best possible price and service. Let me illustrate this for you with stick figures. Like an occupational licensing to like a fence. Let's say you wanted to repair and sell air conditioning units. Well, in order to work as an HVAC contractor in the state of Ohio, you have to be licensed by the Ohio Construction Industry Licensing Board. You have to take an exam, you have to show 5 years of experience as an HVAC technician, and you have to show proof of liability insurance, all in order to get a license. That's a lot of obstacles to hurdle. Now, all of those requirements and obstacles are kind of like a fence that protect the people who have already achieved those licenses and requirements. And why do they love it? Well, it's because it creates less competition for them. Take Bill and Joe here, who both really want to get into the industry, but are either too poor to afford the $15,000 it might take to get the schooling and the training to enter the industry, or might even be too poor to take the exam multiple times would be required for you to get the license. These barriers to entry keep those who might not be able to afford those things out of the industry. And since there's fewer people in the industry, those who are already in, having less competition, can keep their prices higher. That means, unfortunately for consumers here, we've got only 3 options. Someone that offers their services for $120, someone that offers it for $130, and someone that's offering their service for $150. Now, if some of those obstacles were cut out and Bill and Joe were both able to join the industry, they may try to undercut the other company's prices. And if they were able to do that, they would create kind of a reverse bidding war, because whoever could offer the best service for the lower price is likely the person the consumers are going to choose. That's not going to make the people that were already inside the fence really happy, because now they might lose some business and now they have to lower their prices because they've got more competition. Obstacles that keep people out of a particular area of the workforce are sometimes referred to as barriers to entry. And using the fence analogy, you can see how removing some of these barriers to entry can benefit everyone. Bill and Joe, who were previously kept out of joining an industry, can now join it and make money and make a living. And of course, we, the consumers, benefit from lower prices caused by the increase in competition, as they're all vying to be the ones that we choose to hire. So they're going to do their darndest to try to make sure they have the lowest prices and the best service so that we choose them and not the other ones. And that helps us save money. We can take that money we save and spend it on something else that we want, which would benefit another business and all of their employees. Now, I guess I shouldn't say everyone stands to benefit from barriers to entry being removed, because those that were already inside of the fence were forced to either lower their prices or offer better service or face losing business. So they did not stand to gain by those barriers to entry being removed. And so you can imagine that those who benefit from barriers to entry want to keep them in place. And sure enough, that's where lobbying and special interest groups come into play. For example, those of you going into cosmetology should know that Great Clips has spent a lot of money in a lot of different states trying to keep those barriers to entry that exist in the cosmetology field standing up high. Now, why would Great Clips want to keep getting a cosmetology license kind of hard to get? Again, it all goes back to less competition. If any of you get hired someday by Great Clips, you're actually going to want them to try to keep those barriers to entry up once you've already made it in and crossed the hurdles. Why? Well, if it's harder for people to become a cosmetologist or a hairdresser, and there's fewer hairdressers out there, but the demand for hairdressers is still pretty high, then that means people will be willing to pay more to schedule an appointment with the hairdresser. And that, coupled with the fact that Great Clips benefits from there being less competition, means they can keep their prices higher. And if prices are higher, that means likely you're earning more and your wages are higher, as opposed to if there was more competition. If prices decrease because there's more competition, that means you're likely not going to be making as much money. In other words, the more hairdressers there are, the more choices consumers have in hairdressers, which means not as many people are going to choose you. And if not as many people choose you, you're not going to make as much money. And it's not just in the world of cosmetology that this happens. Trades unions in electrical fields and construction field, criminal justice fields, heck, even education unions as well, all lobby and advocate for these barriers to entry to stay up so that those that are already in the industry can keep their wages high. Because again, if there's a surplus of workers, then wages are going to fall. That's one of the reasons why doctors and lawyers make so much money. It takes 8 years of schooling to get to that point, and not everyone has the ability to do that or is willing to do that. There's always going to be a demand for someone to have a doctor or hire a lawyer to defend them in court. So because that demand is high and there's a more finite group of doctors and lawyers, their wages are going to be higher. It's a basic law of supply and demand. So one of the big arguments against occupational licensing is that the barriers to entry that are caused by it restricts job opportunities. It's like closing a lane on a highway. Only so many cars are going to be able to actually fit into the lanes that are still open. Well, unless you're one of these drivers. Another economic term for this is bottlenecking, which is a term that refers to the concept that some people try to restrict others from entering their industry to benefit those that are already in it. All right, now I know what some of you are thinking. All right, we get it, Mr. Lucas. There's some negative aspects to occupational licensing. But what about what you talked about at the beginning? Like, we need licensing in order to protect the public health and safety, so that you don't have unlicensed doctors operating on you, or an unsanitary barber combing your hair with a comb that just fell on the floor, infecting you with lice. Well, your second ed puzzle this week is going to mention some alternatives to occupational licensing. Some alternatives that still hold businesses accountable while maybe not creating the barriers to entry that licensing does. For example, those of you in auto tech that are hoping to be mechanics someday can get an ASE certification. That stands for Automotive Service Excellence. And as those of you in auto tech know, you have to do certain things in order to gain that certification. But in Ohio, you can still be a mechanic and not have that certification. So the ASE certification doesn't block people out of the industry entirely like a license would. Rather, anytime you have a mechanic work on your car that's ASE certified, you have a sense of peace knowing, hey, they do have training. That's how they got the certification. It gives you more confidence as a consumer. And if having a mechanic that's been certified gives consumers more confidence, they're more likely to bring their car to your shop to get it worked on. Therefore, mechanics have every incentive in the world to try to get that ASE certification if they can. And the people that own the repair shops are going to want to hire mechanics that have that ASE certification. So certifications still provide an incentive for workers hoping to join a career field to get the proper training necessary without necessarily making it illegal for someone to practice that field unless they have the certification. Another alternative to occupational licensing is customer reviews. For those of you in culinary arts, you may well know that this is what keeps businesses in your field accountable. And think about it. If you're trying to find a place to eat, are you going to go with the 5-star restaurant, or are you going to go with the restaurant that's been continuously getting 1-star reviews because of their awful service and awful food? There's plenty of other industries that rely heavily on getting good reviews to promote their business. If there's a place that provides low quality service or doesn't have good hygiene or something and they get bad reviews, that can kill their business. Another example is hotels. Most people will often choose a hotel based off of the reviews it gets. That's why websites like Yelp, Facebook, and Google reviews are all so important to these businesses. Heck, there's even review sites starting to pop up for teachers, such as Rate My Teacher and Rate My Professor, where you can literally go on and rate teachers on a scale of 1 to 5. And for those of you that are going to college, whenever you're about to choose a new class, you often want to see who's teaching the class and see the reviews. That might make your decision on whether or not you want to take the class or not. The reviews can be great, but they don't always tell you the whole story. It's often the harshest critics that are attracted to write reviews online because they're passionately upset about something that happened. If you had good service or good things happen to you, you typically don't go write a review. So because there's a lot of harsh critics out there, it can sometimes make reviews a little unreliable. Like how on earth the Anne Frank house has a 4.5-star review is beyond me. I still don't get that. What is there to criticize about Anne Frank's house? Some people get upset about everything. So again, reviews, like certifications, have the power of keeping businesses and employees accountable to the public and consumers. Yet, unlike occupational licensing, it's not run and enforced by the state government, and it doesn't create these barriers to entry that literally make it illegal for some people to do a job, which can sometimes suck because there might be people that are really good at a particular job, but because they don't have the license to do it, if you hire them, they get thrown into prison. But on the other hand, there are stories out there that exist like these.
This arrest document reads like a horror nightmare, and of the 45 new patients that have now come forward, one of them says indeed she wakes up from nightmares at night dreaming that she's still in the unlicensed doctor's operating room, screaming and crying for relief.
Lisa, Alex Ferguson is not a licensed contractor. In fact, we've learned he has no construction licenses at all. Several former customers tell us that this guy has a really good and convincing sales pitch, but they soon regretted hiring him. Last year, News 6 revealed that Ferguson is wanted in Colorado for allegedly ripping off customers who hired him on Craigslist.
You've taken my mom's money, you haven't started the job.
Gilbert Feliciano's mother is among several Central Floridians who say they paid Ferguson thousands of dollars for construction work, but got little to nothing in return.
I just couldn't believe I got taken like that.
After Marty Fuchs complained to the state's licensing department, the agency issued Ferguson this cease and desist letter and fined him $4,000.
Walking down London's high streets, you'll see more barbershops than ever before. They're the top spots for trendy haircuts and popular meeting places. But the UK's barbering industry is difficult to regulate, and barbers here don't even need a license to practice. For some in the capital, this is causing huge problems.
They were here and here.
Meet Jacob. He got a fungal infection after his barber used dirty tools to cut his hair.
In like the summer of 2015, I started to get some pretty bad bumps on my head, and there'd be pus coming out, and every time I'd wake up, I'd look down my pillow and there'd be spots of blood everywhere. So I was put on antibiotics for a combined time of about 4 weeks, but nothing really, it would subside, but it would just come back straight after that. And it was quite painful, quite itchy. I wasn't able to shave without opening up the wounds again.
Dirty clippers or razors at barbershops can put customers at risk of bacterial and viral infections, like folliculitis, herpes, and warts, to name a few.
We are seeing more and more of this, and if the barber isn't trained, then in fact what can happen is there's an entry of bacteria into the scalp, the hair bulb becomes infected, and then they have an infection. If you're trained, you would know that it's very important to sterilise your equipment.
But not everyone is doing that. Take a look at these pictures we took inside an East London barbershop. bloodstained and rusty razors.
Ugh, okay, so I think we get the point there. So this week, besides this Ed puzzle, your second Ed puzzle is going to take a look at the case against occupational licensing, and it's going to show you some of the alternatives to occupational licensing. And then this week you have a CTQ where I'm going to turn it over to you. Are you in favor of occupational licensing, or are you against occupational licensing? Do you think occupational licensing is an absolute necessity to protect the public health and safety and to prevent people from getting scammed? Or is it a logical fallacy to say that the public health and safety can only be preserved if we have occupational licensing? Are there better alternatives? And do you think occupational licensing is a clever way to force you to pay more for services while the rich get richer at the expense of taking away more opportunities from the poor? It's a tough one this week, but it's very relevant to the things that you guys are going to be experiencing here soon as you get your careers started in a lot of the fields that require some of this stuff. And even though not all of you are going to be going into fields that require some of this stuff, all of you will be consumers, and it's worth knowing why you're being forced to pay more for certain services than perhaps you should be. And it's worth having the skill of being able to identify when special interest groups are lobbying for government to implement a law that's ripping you off. Make sure before you do the CTQ that you watch a second Ed puzzle, because that'll also give you some other ideas and expose you to some other arguments to help you write your CTQ. For some reason each year, this topic really interests a lot of students, and there are students that actually want to contact their representatives and they want to figure out how to change some of the things that are required in their field. If you want to do that, here's what I'll tell you. Occupational licensing is a reserved power of the state, so this is something that the state governments deal with. That means you would want to contact your state representatives. And just like our federal government has a Congress with a House and a Senate, our state General Assembly also has a House of Representatives and a Senate as well. In Ohio, you have one person that represents you in the Ohio House of Representatives, and you have one person that represents you in the Ohio Senate. There are 99 representatives in the Ohio House, and there are 33 senators in the Ohio Senate. To find who your representative and your senator are, you go to the Ohio General Assembly website, and there you can type in your information and it will show you who your representatives are in the House and the Senate. It's going to depend on where you live. Half of you in Licking County will have Mark Frazier as your representative in the Ohio House. Half of you will have Larry Householder. Most of you in Licking County will have Jay Hottinger as your senator. So if you click on them on that page, it will then bring you to their main page where you can click contact, and then you can shoot them an email. Your House reps and your senators are members of the Ohio legislative branch, so they're the ones that can actually write laws. But of course, you can also contact the executive branch, the ones responsible for actually enforcing the laws. At the federal level, that's the president, but at the state level, that would be the governor. And our governor, as I'm sure you all know by this point, is Governor Mike DeWine. He's kind of like the president of Ohio. You can also contact him because much like a president, he'll either get to veto or sign any law that comes out of the Ohio General Assembly. And he sometimes also appoints people to head different agencies in the state. And he can also sign executive orders which impact the implementation of a particular law or regulation. So if you're inspired by the things you learned this week or about really anything we learned in this class that's a state issue, that's who to contact to try to make a change. Now, if you're thinking, yeah, I'll reach out to them, they'll probably never get back to me and stuff. Well, actually, with your state legislators, because they represent a smaller constituency, every time I have students reach out to politicians at the state and local level, those politicians almost always get back to them and actually respond to them. So I encourage you to give it a try. If you ever need any guidance on what exactly to say or how to say it, then feel free to email me this week. Or I guess any point in life whenever you decide to contact your representatives. And that'll do it for this week. As always, if you need anything, feel free to reach out and have a great week.